13 years prior, in the remote, sun-baked heart of the Nevada desert, Sheriff Thomasin and his young deputy vanished without a trace during a routine night patrol. Their disappearance ignited a firestorm of speculation, whispered rumors, and an endless, agonizing question mark over the small, forgotten mining town of Blackwood Creek. Then, a sweltering summer afternoon, a group of hikers seeking refuge from the relentless sun stumbled upon an abandoned outhouse nestled deep within the rugged mountains. What they saw inside at the bottom of that dark, fetid pit wasn't just a discovery. It was a chilling revelation, a tangible piece of a long-buried past that would shatter every assumption and rewrite the history of a town desperate for answers. Stay with us until the very end to uncover the full, shocking truth behind this cold case that defied every expectation. And while you're here, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more captivating stories from the depths of forgotten files. Tell us in the comments below, what city are you watching this video from? Blackwood Creek, Nevada, was a ghost of its former self, a skeletal remains of a once thriving mining town. The weathered wooden buildings, bleached by decades of relentless sun and desert winds, sagged under the weight of forgotten dreams. Dust, fine as flour, coated everything, muffling sounds and lending an eerie quiet to the deserted streets. The air itself seemed to hang heavy with the scent of dried sagebrush and the lingering melancholy of abandonment. Rusting mining equipment lay scattered, like discarded toys in the parched earth, monuments to a prosperity that had long since packed up and left, taking most of the population with it. Those who remained were a tight-knit, insular group, their faces etched with the lines of hardship, and their eyes holding secrets that ran as deep as the depleted veins of gold beneath their feet. Into this world of faded glory and simmering silence, Detective Sarah Ward arrived. She was a woman in her late 30s, her sharp, intelligent eyes often shadowed by an unspoken weariness. Blackwood Creek was not a career move. It was an escape, a deliberate plunge into anonymity after a high-profile case in a bustling metropolis had left her with scars that refused to heal. Here, she hoped, the quiet monotony would be a balm, a chance to rebuild a life that felt fractured. Her days were mostly filled with the mundane, petty disputes, occasional minor thefts, and the ever-present stream of missing persons reports from tourists who underestimated the vast, unforgiving wilderness surrounding the town. It was one such case, a middle-aged hiker who'd wandered off the marked trails that currently occupied her desk in the small, sparsely furnished sheriff's office. The fan whirred overhead, stirring the dust motes in the stagnant air as Sarah meticulously reviewed maps, her finger tracing faint lines that disappeared into the rugged expanse of the Chinati Mountains. The case was frustratingly cold, just another nameless face swallowed by the desert. The insistent ring of the landline cut through the oppressive silence, jarring her from her focused contemplation. She answered, her voice calm and professional, but a tremor of something unexpected rippled through her when she heard the frantic voice of a park ranger on the other end. His words, tumbling out in a breathless rush, spoke of two hikers, terrified, stumbling out of the mountains, their faces ashen. They had found something, the ranger stammered, something unsettling deep within a forgotten canyon near an old, crumbling outhouse. What they saw inside, he explained, had frozen them to the bone, a sight so profoundly disturbing it had sent them fleeing down the mountainside, their minds reeling. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning crept up Sarah's spine. It was a premonition, a quiet whisper that this wasn't just another lost hiker, but something far more sinister, a forgotten shadow stirring back to life. The drive to the Chinati Mountains was a slow, arduous crawl. Sarah navigated the winding, unpaved roads in her patrol SUV, the vehicle kicking up clouds of red dust that hung in the still air, thick and suffocating. Beside her, Officer Miller, a young, earnest deputy with a perpetually worried frown, consulted the worn map, his finger tracing the path to the ranger's coordinates. The landscape grew increasingly desolate with every mile, the sparse vegetation giving way to a rugged, unforgiving terrain of sun-baked rock and prickly desert flora. The mountains loomed ahead, dark and foreboding against the vibrant blue sky, their silence a stark contrast to the buzzing uncertainty that now filled Sarah's mind. She felt an unsettling shift in the atmosphere, a quiet dread that whispered of secrets held captive by the very earth beneath their wheels. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a makeshift trailhead, marked by a few scattered cars belonging to the park rangers and the two shaken hikers. The air here was thin, carrying the faint metallic scent of something decaying. A ranger, a weathered man with eyes that had seen too much, pointed them toward a narrow, barely discernible path leading deeper into a secluded canyon. "It's about a quarter-mile up this way," he rasped, his voice hoarse, a slight tremor in his hand as he gestured. They didn't want to go back near it." Sarah nodded, a grim resolve settling over her. She knew, instinctively, that whatever lay ahead would be difficult to confront. The path twisted and turned, forcing them to navigate treacherous loose rocks and thorny bushes. The silence of the canyon was profound, broken only by the crunch of their boots and the distant cry of a hawk. Then, through a thicket of gnarled junipers, it appeared, a small, dilapidated structure leaning precariously to one side, its wooden planks rotted and warped, a testament to years of neglect. It was unmistakably an outhouse, a relic of a bygone era, perhaps a long-forgotten mining camp or a remote trapper's hut. A faint, almost imperceptible stench wafted from it, a sickly sweet odor that tightened Sarah's stomach. Approaching cautiously, Sarah and Miller peered into the gaping hole where the door once hung. Inside, the darkness was absolute, save for a narrow shaft of sunlight filtering through a crack in the roof, illuminating a disturbingly small portion of the pit below. The air was thick, heavy, and rank with the unmistakable smell of decay, mingled with something else. A faint chemical tang. Miller instinctively recoiled, a hand flying to his mouth, but Sarah forced herself to lean closer, her eyes straining to pierce the gloom. Then she saw it. First, a shape, barely discernible against the murky bottom. As her eyes adjusted, the details became horrifyingly clear. There, partially submerged in the viscous, dark fluid at the bottom of the pit, was a dark, leathery boot, and then another. Attached to them, encased in what appeared to be dark, brittle fabric, was the unmistakable outline of a human leg. A wave of nausea washed over Sarah, but she pushed it down, her detective's mind taking over. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a crime scene, one that had been hidden in plain sight for far too long. Within minutes, the canyon, once so quiet, buzzed with activity. Forensics teams, alerted by Sarah's urgent call, arrived, their specialized equipment glinting in the harsh sunlight. The delicate, gruesome process of extraction began, the air filled with the quiet, methodical instructions of the lead forensic anthropologist, interspersed with the occasional grunt of exertion. Hours passed, agonizingly slow under the scorching sun, as the team meticulously worked to retrieve the remains. Finally, with painstaking care, the body was brought to the surface. What emerged from the pit was not a skeleton, but something far more macabre and eerily preserved by the arid conditions of the desert and the unique environment of its tomb. The body was mummified, the skin taut and leathery, clinging to bone. The tattered remnants of a uniform, faded to an unrecognizable shade, still clung to the desiccated frame. But it was the small, distinct objects that confirmed the initial, terrifying suspicion. There, on the belt, despite the passage of years, was a tarnished, but still recognizable, sheriff's star. And on the mummified wrist, a watch, its hands frozen at 2:15, a specific, ornate engraving visible on its back. The engraving read, "To Thomasin, for 20 years of dedication, Blackwood Creek." The collective gasp from the officers present was almost audible. The whispers began, soft and incredulous. Sheriff Thomasin, the man who had vanished 13 years ago, presumed to have fled, to have betrayed his town. He hadn't run. He had been here all along, hidden in the most unthinkable of places. The long-closed case, the cold, forgotten mystery, had just been brutally ripped open, and the truth, whatever it was, promised to be far more unsettling than any of the town's long-held theories. The news of Sheriff Thomasin's discovery ripped through Blackwood Creek like a wildfire, igniting a fresh wave of shock and disbelief. For 13 years, the town had lived with the shadow of his disappearance, a gaping wound that had never truly healed. The prevailing narrative, fueled by whispers and circumstantial evidence, had painted a picture of betrayal. Thomasin, the respected sheriff, had supposedly absconded with a significant sum from the town's dwindling municipal fund, leaving behind a legacy of shame and a broken trust. This theory, however painful, had offered a form of closure, a simple, if bitter, explanation for an unsettling void. Now that carefully constructed edifice of belief had crumbled, leaving behind a jarring, terrifying truth. Inside the small, sterile confines of the makeshift morgue set up in the town's only clinic, the atmosphere was thick with a heavy, almost reverent silence. Sarah stood over the examination table, observing the forensic team at work, their gloved hands meticulously cataloging every detail of the mummified remains. The faint smell of chemicals mingled with the lingering odor of the desert, creating a stark, almost surreal tableau. It was undeniable. Every identifying mark, from the unique pattern of the sheriff's star to the precise engraving on the watch, confirmed the identity. This was indeed Sheriff Thomasin, not a runaway, but a victim. The implication was staggering. If Thomasin had been murdered, then the entire foundation of the cold case, every theory, every lead, every whispered accusation, had been fundamentally flawed. Sarah found herself poring over the brittle, yellowed files of the original investigation, unearthed from the dusty archives of the sheriff's office. The reports were sparse, disjointed, filled with the frustration of an investigation that quickly ran cold. Witness statements spoke of a man who, while sometimes gruff, had been dedicated to his community. Others, fewer in number, hinted at a darker side, a man capable of cutting corners or looking the other way. The consensus, however, had solidified over time. Thomasin was a thief, a deserter. Sarah felt a growing unease as she read, a visceral rejection of the simplistic narrative. The sheer effort involved in hiding a body in such a remote, unlikely location spoke of intent, of a desperate desire for secrecy, not a hurried flight. As she delved deeper, one detail gnawed at her, a persistent burr in her mind. Amidst the sparse notes and the dead ends, the name of Sheriff Thomasin's young deputy, Jack Finch, surfaced repeatedly. Finch, fresh-faced and idealistic, had vanished alongside his mentor that fateful night. But unlike Thomasin, there had never been any suggestion that Finch was involved in embezzlement or flight. The files showed that Finch's family, heartbroken and bewildered, had steadfastly maintained his innocence, clinging to the belief that he had been a loyal officer. Finch, it was noted in several reports, had been the only one who had vocally doubted the absconding theory, even pushing for further investigation into other possibilities before the case was ultimately closed. Sarah leaned back in her creaky chair, rubbing her temples. A chilling realization began to dawn. If Sheriff Thomasin had been murdered and his body concealed with such elaborate care, then what had become of Jack Finch? The prevailing assumption had been that Finch had simply gone with Thomasin, a complicit accomplice. But if Thomasin was a victim, then Finch's disappearance took on a far more sinister hue. Was he another victim, or had he, perhaps, been the one to uncover the truth and subsequently paid the ultimate price? The questions swirled in Sarah's mind, each more unsettling than the last. The discovery of Thomasin's body was not an ending. It was merely the grim opening chapter to a much darker, far more complex story, one that had been silently festering in the heart of Blackwood Creek for over a decade. And Sarah, whether she liked it or not, was now irrevocably drawn into its chilling depths. The revelation of Sheriff Thomasin's true fate hung heavy over Blackwood Creek, a thick, suffocating fog that permeated every conversation, every glance. The townspeople, long accustomed to their narrative of a crooked sheriff, now grappled with a chilling alternative: that one of their own, a lawman sworn to protect them, had been brutally murdered and hidden, his true story silenced for over a decade. The local media, usually content with tales of rattlesnakes and dust storms, descended upon the quiet community, their cameras and microphones amplifying the town's stunned disbelief. Sarah found herself at the center of this sudden storm, her quiet escape shattered, replaced by the relentless demands of a high-profile cold case resurrected from the grave. She spent the following days immersed in the dusty archives of the sheriff's office, sifting through every scrap of paper related to Thomasin and Finch. The scent of old paper and stale coffee filled the air as she worked, often late into the night, the only light in the otherwise dark building. She read every witness statement, every initial police report, every dead-end lead. The original investigation, she quickly realized, had been hampered by a cocktail of inexperience, limited resources, and the seductive simplicity of the runaway sheriff theory. Once that idea had taken root, fueled by a few conveniently placed rumors and the undeniable disappearance of the town's funds, the deeper, more complex possibilities had been largely ignored. What struck Sarah most profoundly was the stark contrast between the initial reactions to Thomasin's disappearance and Finch's. While Thomasin's name had quickly become synonymous with betrayal and shame, Jack Finch's had simply faded into the background, an unfortunate casualty of his mentor's supposed deceit. The files on Finch were painfully thin, little more than a missing persons report, overshadowed by the larger scandal. Yet it was in these sparse notes that Sarah found the most compelling clues, tiny flickers of doubt that had been systematically extinguished by the prevailing narrative. She discovered several interviews with Finch's family and a handful of close friends, all of whom painted a consistent picture of a young, ambitious, and fundamentally honest man. His parents, still living in a modest house on the outskirts of town, had been adamant in their son's innocence from day one. They recalled Jack's growing unease in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, his subtle hints of something not right in the town, something brewing beneath the surface of Blackwood Creek's quiet facade. These concerns, however, had been dismissed by the original investigators as the understandable anguish of grieving parents, unwilling to accept their son's alleged complicity. One particular handwritten note, tucked into the very back of Finch's file, caught Sarah's eye. It was a brief summary of an interview with a grizzled old prospector, now long deceased, who had lived a hermit's life high in the mountains. The prospector had claimed to have seen Finch near the old Blackwood mine, a complex of abandoned tunnels notoriously difficult to navigate, just days before he vanished. He described Finch looking pale as a ghost and muttering about snakes in the ground and dirty gold. The original investigator had dismissed the old man's ramblings as the incoherent ramblings of a senile recluse, noting that the Blackwood mine had been officially closed for decades. But to Sarah, the phrase dirty gold resonated, echoing the whispers she had heard about potential illegal mining operations in the area, a persistent rumor that had never gained enough traction to warrant a formal investigation. The more she read, the more a gnawing certainty took hold in Sarah's gut. Jack Finch hadn't simply vanished. He hadn't been an accomplice. He had been an active participant in something far more dangerous than simple embezzlement, something that had cost both him and Sheriff Thomasin their lives. The question, then, wasn't just what had happened, but why Finch, a junior deputy, had been so deeply involved and why his disappearance had been so conveniently swept under the rug. It defied logic that Finch, a man known for his integrity, would simply follow a corrupt sheriff into a life on the run. No, the truth had to be far more complex, far more sinister. The thought of Finch, alive for some unknown period after Thomasin's death, perhaps witnessing the murder or even trying to intervene, sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. Had he been held captive, tortured? Or had he, in a desperate attempt to bring justice, stumbled into an even deeper web of deceit, ultimately meeting the same grim fate as his superior? The chilling possibility that Finch's body lay somewhere else, equally hidden, equally forgotten, settled heavily in her mind. The desert, with its vast, unforgiving expanse, was a notorious keeper of secrets. And as the sun dipped below the jagged mountain peaks, casting long, menacing shadows across Blackwood Creek, Sarah knew with a chilling certainty that the discovery of Sheriff Thomasin's body was not the end of the mystery, but merely the gruesome key to unlocking a far larger, more terrifying truth. The hunt for Jack Finch, she realized, was no longer a formality. It was now the most critical piece of the puzzle, the only way to truly understand what had transpired on that fateful night, 13 years ago. The silence of the town, once a comfort, now felt like a suffocating shroud holding its breath, waiting for the true story to finally break free. With the grim truth of Sheriff Thomasin's murder now undeniably established, Sarah knew her next crucial step was to re-engage with the family of Jack Finch. For 13 long years they had endured the quiet agony of uncertainty, compounded by the unspoken shame that clung to their son's name by association. Their grief, she suspected, had been a solitary burden, untempered by the public mourning afforded to other missing persons because their son had been painted as a complicit runaway. Now armed with the knowledge that Thomasin was a victim, not a villain, Sarah felt a heavy responsibility to offer them some measure of truth and perhaps a glimmer of closure. She found the Finch family in the same modest, slightly run-down house on the edge of town, the one mentioned in the old case files. The paint was peeling, and the small garden, once meticulously kept, was now overgrown with weeds, a silent testament to the years of unspoken sorrow that had settled over the home. Jack's mother, Eleanor, a woman whose face was a roadmap of etched anxieties and faded hopes, opened the door. Her eyes, sunken and shadowed, held a flicker of apprehension at the sight of a new detective on her doorstep. Sarah introduced herself, explaining the recent discovery with a somber tone, carefully choosing her words to convey both empathy and the gravity of the situation. As Sarah spoke of the mummified remains and the irrefutable identification of Sheriff Thomasin, Eleanor's frail hands went to her mouth, a silent gasp escaping her lips. Tears, long held and bitter, finally spilled down her weathered cheeks. Jack's father, Arthur, a stoic man whose shoulders seemed perpetually slumped, emerged from the living room, his gaze fixed on Sarah, a raw, almost desperate hope slowly dawning in his eyes. For them, Thomasin's murder was not a new tragedy, but a vindication, a confirmation of what they had always instinctively known. Their Jack, their honorable son, had been innocent. They spoke of Jack with a fierce tenderness, recalling his unwavering sense of duty, his idealism, and his sharp, observant mind. They recounted his growing frustration with Sheriff Thomasin in the weeks leading up to their disappearance. Not frustration born of suspicion of corruption, but rather of Thomasin's apparent reluctance to delve deeper into certain local issues. Jack kept saying something big was going on, Eleanor whispered, her voice reedy with emotion. Something about the old mines and strange faces around town. He said Sheriff Thomasin seemed to be dragging his feet, or maybe he was scared. Arthur, his voice a low rumble, then added a detail that sent a jolt through Sarah. Jack was particularly worried about the Blackwood mine, said he saw lights late at night and heard noises from deep inside, even though it's been abandoned for 50 years. He swore it wasn't just old tremors. Arthur himself had been a miner in his youth, his hands still calloused and strong, and he understood the unique geography of the area. He knew the labyrinthine tunnels of the Blackwood mine better than almost anyone. He'd told Jack it was impossible to be working in there without detection, but Jack had been insistent, even suggesting that Thomasin had dismissed his concerns too quickly. This new information aligned chillingly with the old prospector's dismissed statement in Finch's file. The Blackwood mine. Dirty gold. The pieces, once scattered and seemingly unrelated, were beginning to coalesce. Did Jack ever mention anyone specific in connection to these activities? Sarah pressed gently, sensing the delicate nature of their memories. Eleanor hesitated, glancing at Arthur. He mentioned a name once, the Caldwells. Said they were acting strangely, always around the mine entrances, even though they claimed to be just checking on their property. They own most of the land up there now. The Caldwells, the most powerful and notoriously reclusive family in Blackwood Creek, their wealth dating back to the town's original mining boom. Even if their current enterprises remained shrouded in mystery, their influence was vast, their presence in town quiet but undeniable. They were the kind of people no one in Blackwood Creek ever openly questioned. As Sarah rose to leave, a wave of profound sympathy washed over her. These were not just grieving parents, they were survivors of a different kind of trauma, a public shaming that had twisted their private grief. She promised them that this time, no stone would be left unturned. The discovery of Sheriff Thomasin's body had not only resurrected a cold case, but had also given a voice to the silent suffering of the Finch family. Their quiet resolve, their enduring belief in their son, now served as a powerful motivator for Sarah. She realized that finding Jack Finch and uncovering the truth of his fate was not just about solving a crime. It was about finally bringing peace to a family that had waited 13 long, agonizing years in the shadows of a profound and unjust doubt. The first tangible lead, the Caldwells and their connection to the Blackwood mine, now pointed her down a path that promised to be as treacherous and dark as the mine tunnels themselves. The Golden Nugget had once been the pulsating heart of Blackwood Creek, a raucous haven where miners drowned their sorrows and celebrated their fleeting fortunes. Now it was little more than a dimly lit tomb, a mausoleum of forgotten laughter and whispered secrets. Its once polished wooden bar top was scarred and sticky, smelling faintly of stale beer and lost hopes. A few solitary figures hunched over their drinks, their faces illuminated by the green glow of a dusty neon sign advertising a long-discontinued brand of whiskey. The air was thick with the scent of cheap tobacco and the quiet hum of a battered jukebox playing country classics from a bygone era. Sarah pushed open the heavy swing door, the mournful creak echoing in the cavernous space, and felt an immediate shift in atmosphere, a palpable sense of eyes tracking her every move, even as the patrons pretended to ignore her. She approached the bar, her gaze sweeping over the various faces, searching for one that might hold a glimmer of recognition from the old files. Behind the counter, a woman with a face as weathered as the desert itself wiped down the counter with a slow, deliberate motion. Her hair, once probably a vibrant shade, was now a faded gray, pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes, however, were sharp and knowing, missing nothing. This had to be Agnes, the barmaid mentioned in the old reports, a fixture of the Golden Nugget for as long as anyone could remember. "Agnes?" Sarah asked, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the droning music. The woman slowly looked up, her gaze steady, assessing. "Depends on who's asking and why," she drawled, her voice raspy from years of smoke and late nights. Sarah introduced herself, explaining, briefly, the renewed investigation into Sheriff Thomasin's disappearance. Agnes's expression remained impassive, but Sarah saw a flicker, a momentary tightening around her eyes, a shadow of something she couldn't quite decipher. Surprise? Fear? Resignation? "I remember them," Agnes finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the very mention of their names might disturb the fragile peace of the bar. "Sheriff Thomasin and young Jack Finch, they were in here the night they vanished." Her voice trailed off, leaving the unspoken hanging in the stale air. Sarah leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Do you remember anything specific about that night? Anything unusual?" Agnes sighed, a long, weary exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of years. They were agitated, more than usual. Thomasin, he was always a man of few words, but that night he was restless. kept pacing by the window, looking out into the street. And Finch? He was practically buzzing, kept trying to get Thomasin to listen, to really listen to him. Listen about what? Sarah pressed, her heart quickening. Agnes wiped a phantom smudge from the counter. They were talking about the mines, specifically the old Blackwood mine. Finch was convinced someone was in there, working it. Said he heard machinery, saw lights, even a few unfamiliar vehicles near the access roads. Thomasin, he seemed reluctant to believe him at first, said it was just old tremors, or maybe some kids messing around. This confirmed what the Finch family had told her, giving new weight to Jack's observations. But something changed, didn't it? Sarah prodded gently. Agnes nodded, her gaze drifting to a dusty framed photograph of the bar in its heyday, bustling with miners. Yeah, Thomasin, he suddenly got real quiet. Finch was showing him something on a map, whispering. Thomasin's face, it went white. Looked like he'd seen a ghost. Then he pounded his fist on the bar just once, real hard, and said something about enough is enough, and Caldwell's pushing too far. The Caldwells. The name resonated, confirming the Finch's suspicions. Did they mention what the Caldwells were doing? Not directly, Agnes said, her eyes now fixed on Sarah's, a hint of genuine fear flickering within them. But the whispers, they'd been going around for months, about the Caldwells secretly reopening some of the old veins. Not for gold, necessarily, but something else. Something valuable, but illegal. Everyone knew they owned most of the land, but they'd officially closed all operations years ago. People assumed they were just sitting on the land, waiting for prices to rise again. But Jack, he seemed to think they were already extracting something, and whatever it was big enough to scare the sheriff. Agnes then leaned in, her voice dropping to a near, inaudible whisper, her eyes darting nervously towards the few remaining patrons. The Caldwells. They've got long arms in this town, Detective. Always have. Since before anyone can remember, they own the land, they own half the businesses, and they definitely own some of the people. If Sheriff Thomasin and Deputy Finch got involved in their business, well, Blackwood Creek can be a very quiet place for those who ask too many questions. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. The implication was clear. The Caldwells were not just a wealthy family, they were a formidable, potentially dangerous power in Blackwood Creek, operating outside the law's reach. Thomasin and Finch had stumbled upon something far more significant than petty theft or local corruption. They had uncovered a hidden enterprise, a secret operation, run by the town's most influential family, and the outhouse, she now understood, was not just a random burial site, but a chilling testament to the Caldwells' ruthless grip on power and their willingness to silence anyone who threatened their illicit empire. The quiet murmurs of Blackwood Creek, Sarah realized, were not just whispers of history, but echoes of a profound and deadly secret still very much alive. The lead from Agnes at the Golden Nugget was the break Sarah had been desperately searching for. The Caldwells. The Blackwood Mine. It wasn't just a local rumor anymore. It was a tangible connection, a thread that connected the past to the present, the missing sheriff to the influential family. The air in Blackwood Creek, already thick with dust and unspoken stories, now felt charged with a new kind of tension, a quiet hum of danger. The next morning, under a sky that burned with the relentless Nevada sun, Sarah and Officer Miller headed towards the Blackwood Mine Complex. The approach was marked by a decaying wooden sign, barely legible, proclaiming Blackwood Mining Company, closed indefinitely. The road, once bustling with heavy machinery and daily traffic, was now little more than a dirt track, overgrown with tough desert scrub and punctuated by deep ruts from infrequent, unauthorized vehicles. The sheer scale of the abandoned operation was staggering. Skeletal derricks clawed at the sky, rusted railway tracks vanished into the earth, and mountainous piles of tailings bleached white by the elements towered over them like silent sentinels. As they drove deeper into the vast property, the isolation became absolute. The only sounds were the crunch of their tires on the gravel and the distant cry of a solitary bird of prey. Sarah felt a prickle of unease. This was precisely the kind of place where secrets could be buried, where illicit activities could thrive unseen. The sheer remoteness provided an ideal cover. They left the patrol SUV near what the old maps indicated was the main entrance shaft, a gaping maw in the earth, sealed with a rusting, padlocked gate. The gate, however, looked more ceremonial than functional, its metal weakened by corrosion. Sarah knew this wasn't their target. Jack Finch had mentioned lights and noises from inside the mines, suggesting a more clandestine access point. Arthur Finch, Jack's father, with his deep knowledge of the old mine system, had drawn Sarah a rough sketch of some lesser-known, often overlooked entrances, hidden amongst the rugged terrain. He described them as small, almost insignificant, easily missed by anyone unfamiliar with the old mining routes. Following Arthur's rough map, they began to trek on foot, the harsh desert sun beating down mercilessly. Sarah found herself constantly scanning the landscape, her eyes seeking out irregularities in the natural formations. After nearly an hour of arduous hiking, scrambling over loose rocks and pushing through thorny bushes, Miller let out a low whistle. "Detective, over here." He stood by a sheer rock face, almost perfectly camouflaged by a cluster of boulders and thick, thorny scrub. It was a narrow crevice, barely wide enough for one person to squeeze through, leading into what appeared to be a natural cave. But closer inspection revealed subtle signs of human intervention. A rough-hewn wooden lintel above the opening, partially obscured by moss and dirt, and faint, almost erased boot prints in the fine dust at the entrance. This was it. A wave of cold, damp air immediately greeted them as they stepped inside, a stark contrast to the searing heat outside. The air grew heavier with the distinct earthy smell of damp rock and decaying timber, mixed with something else, a faint metallic tang. Sarah switched on her powerful tactical flashlight, its beam cutting through the oppressive darkness, revealing a rough-hewn tunnel stretching into the gloom. The walls were uneven, raw rock, occasionally shored up by thick, ancient timbers. The air felt thick, humid, and utterly silent save for the drip of unseen water. They moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing strangely in the confined space. The tunnel sloped gently downwards, leading them deeper into the earth. Sarah's senses were on high alert. Her flashlight beam swept across the walls, revealing occasional glints of pyrite, false gold. Then she saw it. Not immediately obvious, but unmistakable once her light lingered. Fresh tire tracks, deep and distinct, imprinted in the damp earth of the tunnel floor. These weren't the faint impressions of abandoned equipment. These were recent, made by a vehicle that had driven through here recently, perhaps even within the last few days. The pattern was clear, heavy-duty off-road tires. A few yards further, the tunnel widened slightly, and the evidence became even more compelling. Scattered on the ground were discarded plastic bottles, energy bar wrappers, and even a few cigarette butts, all of them looking remarkably fresh, unlike the ancient debris one would expect in a truly abandoned mine. These were not the casual leavings of a lone explorer. They were the detritus of sustained human activity. They saw faint scorch marks on the rock walls, indicating small fires, perhaps for light or warmth during extended shifts. The presence of modern refuse confirmed it. Someone, or a group of people, was actively using this supposedly abandoned mine. The secrecy, the hidden entrance, the fresh tracks, it all pointed to an illicit operation, exactly as Jack Finch had suspected. The hairs on the back of Sarah's neck prickled. They were no longer investigating a cold case. They were standing in the heart of an active, illegal enterprise, one that had likely claimed the lives of a sheriff and his deputy. The air in the mine, once just damp and earthy, now felt heavy with the unspoken threat of discovery. The true depths of Blackwood Creek's secrets were finally beginning to reveal themselves, and Sarah knew with a chilling certainty that the path ahead would lead them into the very belly of the beast. The evidence within the Blackwood mine tunnel was irrefutable. The fresh tire tracks, the recent refuse, the lingering scent of human presence. This was no mere abandoned site. It was an active, clandestine operation, one that now, chillingly, seemed inextricably linked to the Caldwell family. Back at the small sheriff's office, the weight of this realization pressed down on Sarah. Blackwood Creek, for all its dusty quietude, harbored a secret far more insidious than any she had initially imagined. She initiated a deeper dive into the Caldwell family's history, pulling records, property deeds, and any scraps of information she could find. The Caldwells were old money in Blackwood Creek, their lineage tracing back to the first gold rushes that had birthed the town. They owned vast tracts of land surrounding the original Blackwood mine, their wealth seemingly sustained by shrewd investments and carefully managed legacies, even as the town itself withered. On paper, their mining operations had ceased decades ago, the official closure documented in faded county records. Yet the Finch's testimony, Agnes's whispers, and now the undeniable signs within the mine tunnels painted a different picture. Sarah discovered that over the past few years, the Caldwell family had quietly bought up several adjacent parcels of land, effectively encircling the entire Blackwood mine complex. Their stated reason was investment and future development, but the remote locations and the lack of any visible progress on these new acquisitions raised immediate red flags. They operated with a quiet efficiency, rarely engaging with the town's day-to-day life, preferring the isolation of their sprawling ranch compound outside of town. The patriarch Elias Caldwell was a man whose reputation preceded him, a stern, unyielding figure, known for his piercing gaze and his unshakable control over his family's affairs. He was a man who rarely left his compound, conducting business through a network of trusted, equally reticent associates. The deeper Sarah dug, the clearer the picture became. The Caldwells weren't just sitting on their land, they were exploiting it. But what exactly were they mining in secret? Gold, while valuable, was a difficult and often noisy operation. The scale of the activity Sarah had witnessed in the tunnels suggested something substantial, yet there had been no public reports, no influx of heavy machinery, no obvious signs of a renewed gold rush. The dirty gold mentioned by the old prospector still resonated in her mind. Could it be something else entirely? Something that required far more secrecy than just evading taxes on mineral extraction? Sarah consulted geological maps and old mining surveys. Blackwood Creek was known for its silver deposits and, in some rare veins, high-grade copper, but there were also historical mentions of lesser-known but increasingly valuable rare earth minerals in the region. These minerals, crucial for modern electronics and green technologies, often had complex and expensive extraction processes, and their trade could be highly lucrative, especially if done off the books to avoid environmental regulations and taxes. The idea of an illegal rare earth mineral operation hidden deep within a forgotten mine system suddenly seemed chillingly plausible. It explained the extreme secrecy, the remote access points, and the formidable influence of the Caldwells, who would undoubtedly leverage their local power to keep such an enterprise hidden. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place, forming a grim mosaic. Sheriff Thomasin and Deputy Finch, on that fateful night, had likely stumbled upon this clandestine operation. Perhaps they had been responding to one of Jack's persistent hunches, or perhaps they had encountered an unexpected vehicle near a mine entrance. Whatever the trigger, they had seen something they weren't supposed to see, something that threatened the Caldwells' highly profitable, deeply concealed enterprise. It explained the ferocity of their disappearance, the elaborate concealment of Thomasin's body, a clear message to anyone else who might dare to look too closely. The motive was clear: money and power protected by ruthless efficiency. The Caldwells had built their empire on the resources of this land, and they would stop at nothing to maintain it, even if it meant burying inconvenient truths and inconvenient law enforcement officers in the deepest, darkest corners of their forgotten minds. The thought sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. She was no longer just investigating a cold case. She was challenging a deeply entrenched power structure, one that had already demonstrated its willingness to kill to protect its secrets. The quiet, desolate mountains around Blackwood Creek no longer felt peaceful. They felt like silent, watchful eyes, harboring dangers that lay far deeper than any forgotten mining shaft. And Sarah, with her renewed determination, knew she was about to stir a hornet's nest that had remained undisturbed for 13 agonizing years. The hunt for Jack Finch had now escalated into a confrontation with a powerful, shadowy force. The cold, hard truth of the Caldwells' illicit operation settled over Blackwood Creek like a shroud, a chilling confirmation of the whispers that had haunted the town for decades. Sarah knew, with a certainty that gnawed at her, that the discovery of Sheriff Thomasin's body was not an isolated incident, but merely the gruesome key that unlocked a far larger, more terrifying secret. The question of Jack Finch's fate now loomed larger than ever. If Thomasin had been murdered for stumbling upon the Caldwells' secret, then Finch, his loyal deputy, who had been actively pushing for an investigation into the Blackwood mine, must surely have met a similar, if not identical, end. The desert, vast and unforgiving, held its secrets tightly, but Sarah was determined to pry this one open. Armed with the updated information, Sarah requested additional resources from the state. The initial response was hesitant. Blackwood Creek was a small, forgotten town, and a cold case, even with a body, rarely warranted such extensive manpower. But Sarah's meticulous presentation, highlighting the potential for a large-scale illegal mining operation and the possibility of a powerful family attempting to obstruct justice, finally convinced her superiors. Within days, a small but dedicated team of investigators, along with a specialized search and rescue unit, converged on Blackwood Creek, their presence a stark contrast to the town's usual quietude. The search for Jack Finch began with renewed intensity, focusing on the vast, labyrinthine complex of the Blackwood mine and the surrounding desert landscape. Sarah, alongside Officer Miller and the incoming team, spent days meticulously mapping out potential hidden access points, cross-referencing old mining blueprints with Arthur Finch's invaluable sketches. The Blackwood mine system was a network of tunnels, shafts, and abandoned passages, some barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, others dropping into terrifying, unexplored depths. It was a place where a body could easily vanish, swallowed by the earth and forgotten for eternity. The search was grueling. The sun beat down relentlessly, raising temperatures to unbearable levels, the fine dust coating everything and getting into every crevice. The search teams, equipped with specialized lighting and thermal imaging cameras, systematically swept through the accessible sections of the mine, their voices echoing eerily in the oppressive darkness. They explored every crevice, every collapsed section, every forgotten shaft. Sarah herself spent hours in the tunnels, the damp, earthy air pressing in on her, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, searching for any sign, any anomaly that might point to Finch's whereabouts. Each day ended with exhaustion and growing frustration, as the vastness of the underground world seemed to mock their efforts. She recalled the details of Thomasin's burial, the old outhouse, a seemingly random and desperate choice, yet strategically located off a rarely used trail. This suggested that whoever buried him needed to dispose of the body quickly, without drawing attention, but perhaps lacked the time or resources for a more permanent solution within the mines themselves. This thought became a driving force in her revised search strategy. If Thomasin was a hurried disposal, perhaps Finch's body, if hidden separately, might also be in a place that offered quick concealment rather than a deep, complex burial in the mine. Sarah spent her evenings reviewing the aerial maps of the entire Caldwell property, paying close attention to any minor structures, any depressions in the land, any areas that seemed out of place. She cross-referenced these with historical satellite imagery, looking for changes in vegetation or terrain that might indicate recent disturbance. The Caldwell compound itself, sprawling and heavily guarded, was off-limits, without a warrant, but the vast stretches of their undeveloped land, particularly around the mine entrances, remained fair game for the search teams. During one particularly frustrating evening, as she stared at the satellite images, a tiny anomaly caught her eye. High in a remote, almost inaccessible canyon far from the main mine entrances was a faint circular depression in the earth. It was almost perfectly camouflaged by a cluster of gnarled mesquite trees, but the pattern of the surrounding sparse vegetation suggested a slightly different growth habit within that circular area, as if the ground had been disturbed and settled differently. It was the kind of detail most people would miss, but Sarah's detective's eye, honed by years of searching for the hidden, instinctively recognized it as something unusual. She pulled up older satellite images, and the anomaly became even more pronounced. In some earlier photos, the outline of what looked like another small, dilapidated structure, similar in size to the outhouse where Thomasin was found, could be vaguely discerned before being obscured by later growth. Her breath caught in her throat. Could it be another outhouse, far removed from the first, deep in an isolated canyon, almost as if designed for ultimate secrecy? The original outhouse might have been a desperate, hurried disposal for Thomasin, but a second one, further out, deeper into the Caldwell's territory, hinted at a more deliberate, more calculated concealment. The sheer logic of it was chilling. If Thomasin was the unexpected, immediate problem, then Finch, perhaps, was the lingering threat, the one who knew too much, who could tie the murder back to the Caldwell's illegal operations. His disposal would have required more care, more thought, to ensure his silence remained absolute. The location, so remote and seemingly inconsequential, was a perfect place for a body meant to disappear forever. Sarah felt a surge of grim hope mixed with a profound sense of foreboding. She gathered her maps, her instincts screaming. The search for Jack Finch had been a desperate, often disheartening quest. But now she felt a cold certainty that the answers, as gruesome as they might be, lay waiting for them, hidden in the depths of another forgotten desert structure. The desolate mountains, for too long the silent guardians of dark secrets, were finally ready to yield their grim truths. The coordinates derived from Sarah's meticulous analysis of the satellite imagery led them deep into a rugged, forgotten corner of the Caldwell's vast land. The path, barely discernible, wound through a labyrinth of sun-baked rock formations and dense thickets of creosote bush, a testament to its infrequent use. The air grew heavy with the cloying scent of desert flora and the unspoken tension that hummed between Sarah and Officer Miller. This was it. This was the place where, according to her gut feeling and the cold logic of the investigation, Jack Finch's truth lay buried. The patrol vehicle, now accompanied by a second, larger SUV carrying members of the specialized search and rescue team, navigated the treacherous terrain with agonizing slowness. As they crested a particularly steep rise, the landscape opened into a hidden basin, a natural amphitheater, ringed by jagged, impassable peaks. And there, nestled at the base of a particularly gnarled, ancient juniper tree, was the faint, dilapidated outline of another outhouse. It was smaller, even more ramshackle than the first, almost swallowed by the encroaching desert vegetation, as if nature itself had sought to reclaim this grim secret. Its wooden planks, bleached to a pale gray, sagged inward, and the door, long since rotted away, left a gaping black maw that seemed to beckon them into its dark embrace. A collective hush fell over the team as they approached. The air here was strangely still, devoid of even the typical desert breeze. A profound sense of dread, cold and immediate, settled over Sarah. This felt different from the first discovery. That had been a shocking revelation, a sudden blow. This felt like walking into a trap, a deliberately set stage for a truth no one wanted to uncover. The lead forensic anthropologist from the state team, Dr. Albright, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and eyes that had seen countless horrors, took charge. The process was painstakingly slow, methodical. Unlike the first outhouse, where the body had been partially visible, this one's depths were shrouded in absolute blackness. Specialized cameras on long poles were lowered into the pit, their powerful lights cutting through the murky void. The live feed on the small monitor showed nothing but thick, viscous darkness at first. Then, slowly, agonizingly, the shape began to emerge. It was undeniably a human form, partially submerged in the same putrid, dark fluid that had preserved Sheriff Thomasin's remains. But unlike Thomasin, whose body had been intact, this one showed clear signs of severe trauma. The uniform, though similarly decayed, seemed to be clinging more tightly to the form beneath, as if strained. As the cameras adjusted, focusing on a specific area, a collective gasp rippled through the team. A jagged dark stain marred the chest area of the uniform, and what looked like a shattered bone protruded at an unnatural angle. This was not a peaceful resting place, this was a brutal crime scene. The painstaking extraction process began, even more delicate than the first. The team worked with grim determination, their movements precise, their faces masked by professional detachment, though the underlying tension was palpable. Hours crawled by under the unyielding sun. Finally, with a series of quiet grunts and careful maneuvering, the second body was brought to the surface. The mummified remains, though more damaged than Thomasin's, were still remarkably preserved. The uniform, once blue, was now a faded, almost black remnant, but the distinctive cut was unmistakable. And then the identification. On the belt, a smaller, less ornate, but still recognizable deputy's badge. And on the right wrist, a simple, sturdy watch, its face cracked, its hands frozen at a different time than Thomasin's. But on the back, a familiar faint inscription, "To Jack for courage, love Mom and Dad." A wave of profound sadness washed over Sarah. Jack Finch. Young, idealistic Jack Finch. He had not abandoned his post. He had not betrayed his town. He had been murdered, just like his sheriff, his courageous spirit silenced in this desolate, forgotten corner of the world. His death confirmed everything. His suspicions were valid, his warnings ignored, and his loyalty absolute. As the forensic team meticulously examined the body, a small, almost insignificant object caught Dr. Albright's eye. Tucked into the inner breast pocket of the uniform, nestled against the desiccated flesh, was a small, leathery packet, surprisingly intact despite the years of submersion. With gloved hands, Dr. Albright carefully retrieved it. It was a small, well-worn notebook, its pages thin and brittle, but miraculously preserved by the lack of oxygen and the strange chemical properties of the pit. The team held their breath as Dr. Albright carefully pried open the cover. The pages were filled with frantic, almost illegible handwriting, in what appeared to be code or shorthand, but on the very last page, a single clearly drawn, rough sketch. It was a map, crude but precise, of a section of the Blackwood mine, and on it, a circled area marked with a stark, simple symbol, a large X and the word cache. Below it, barely visible, a set of coordinates, not for gold, not for rare earth minerals, but a location, a specific point, within the vast, dark labyrinth of the Caldwell's secret operation. This was more than just a burial site. It was a testament, a final desperate act of a dying man to leave behind the truth. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with a chilling sense of dread. Jack Finch hadn't just been a victim, he had been a witness. And he had left them a trail. A trap indeed. But not for him, not entirely. It was a trap for his killers, meticulously laid from beyond the grave, now sprung by the passage of time and the tenacity of a new detective. The game had truly begun, and the next move, she knew, would be decisive. The small notebook clutched in Sarah's hand felt like a live wire, humming with the static of long-suppressed truth. Jack Finch, from beyond the grave, had left a breadcrumb trail, a desperate attempt to expose the very darkness that had consumed him and Sheriff Thomasin. The sketch, crude yet precise, of a section of the Blackwood mine with the ominous cache and coordinates was not merely a map, it was a confession in waiting, a key to unraveling the Caldwell's empire. Back at the makeshift command center in the sheriff's office, the atmosphere was electric, with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Dr. Albright had carefully extracted the notebook, its pages surprisingly resilient, though brittle. Each line of Finch's frantic scrawl was meticulously photographed and analyzed. The shorthand, initially baffling, slowly yielded its secrets as Sarah, with her sharp mind and an innate understanding of a deputy's typical note-taking, began to decipher it. It was a fragmented, harrowing account. Dates, times, vehicle descriptions, names, and most damningly, a series of entries detailing the systematic, illegal extraction of rare earth minerals from the Blackwood mine by the Caldwell family. Finch had documented their movements, their schedule, even the names of some of the low-level workers they employed, many of whom were undocumented immigrants, making them easily exploitable and less likely to report anything to authorities. The final entries were chilling. Finch had been tracking a specific large shipment. He had observed Elias Caldwell's younger brother, Thomas Caldwell, a notoriously hot-headed and impulsive man who handled much of the family's day-to-day operations at the mine site. Finch had suspected that Thomasin, despite his initial reluctance, was finally on the verge of making his move, spurred on by Finch's relentless insistence and the sheer scale of the illegal operation they had uncovered. The last entry, scrawled with a desperate urgency, mentioned a confrontation, a showdown, at an isolated access point. Then, a chilling blank space. The coordinates led to a rarely used, almost completely overgrown adit, a horizontal entrance to a mine, deep within the most remote section of the Blackwood complex, not far from where Finch's body had been found. This was a location known only to the Caldwells and a few old-timers who had worked the mines decades ago. It was the perfect place for a secret operation, and, chillingly, the perfect place for a final deadly confrontation. Armed with this irrefutable evidence, Sarah knew they couldn't wait any longer for a formal, lengthy warrant process for the Caldwell compound. The time for subtle investigation was over. This was a direct threat, a family that had murdered law enforcement officers and likely continued their illegal activities for over a decade. Under the cover of a moonless night, a small, highly trained tactical team led by Sarah and Officer Miller moved silently towards the Caldwell compound. The sprawling ranch was a fortress, surrounded by high fences and monitored by security cameras. But the team had found a blind spot, a weakness in their perimeter. The element of surprise was paramount. They breached the perimeter quickly and silently, moving through the manicured grounds with practiced efficiency. The main ranch house was a sprawling, opulent structure, its windows dark. Inside they found Elias Caldwell, his formidable presence undiminished even in sleep, along with his younger brother Thomas and several armed guards. The surprise raid was swift, overwhelming, and without resistance. The Caldwells, despite their power, were caught completely off guard. In the interrogation room, under the harsh glare of the fluorescent lights, Elias Caldwell maintained a steely silence, his eyes cold and unreadable. He denied everything, citing his family's long history in the town, their reputation. But Thomas, younger, less disciplined, and visibly rattled by the sudden brutal end to their clandestine world, began to crack under Sarah's relentless, logical questioning. He initially feigned ignorance, then bluster, but the weight of Jack Finch's notebook, laid out before him as undeniable proof, began to chip away at his composure. Sarah, her voice calm but unwavering, laid out the evidence: the hidden mine access, the fresh tire tracks, the modern refuse, Finch's detailed notes, the discovery of both bodies, the matching injuries. She explained how Jack Finch had meticulously documented their operation, how he had pinpointed the specific location of their secret extraction site, how he had even named names. She described the confrontation, painting a picture of two lawmen doing their duty, stumbling upon a horrifying truth. Finally, Thomas Caldwell broke. The confession, when it came, was a torrent of panicked, guilt-ridden words. He confirmed the illegal rare earth mineral operation, admitting it had been going on for years, a desperate attempt to maintain the Caldwell fortune after the legitimate mining ventures dried up. He confessed that on that fateful night, Thomasin and Finch, responding to a tip from Finch himself, had indeed cornered them at the remote adit. Thomasin had threatened to shut them down, to expose everything. "It was an accident," Thomas blubbered, his face streaked with tears and snot, a pathetic shadow of the powerful man he usually projected. "Thomasin, he resisted. We struggled. He fell. He hit his head. It was a mistake. We just needed to get rid of him. We panicked. The old outhouse was just the closest place. We thought no one would ever find him." He then described Finch's fate, his words a horrifying echo of Sarah's earlier chilling premonition. Finch, horrified by Thomasin's death, had tried to escape, scrambling out of the adit. Thomas and his men had pursued him, cornering him at the second, more remote outhouse. Finch had fought desperately. "He just wouldn't give up," Thomas whimpered, his eyes wide with a lingering fear that transcended the present moment. "He had that damn notebook. We had to take it. We had to silence him. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. None of it." He detailed how Finch had been beaten, his struggles finally ending with a single, brutal blow that had broken his neck. The notebook, he admitted, had been overlooked in the frantic disposal, a fatal oversight in their otherwise meticulously planned cover-up. Elias Caldwell, sitting silently through his brother's unraveling, remained stoic, his face a mask of cold fury and defeat. He offered no words of remorse, no explanation, just a hardened acceptance of their downfall. But the truth, in all its brutal simplicity, had finally been dragged from the depths, shattering the Caldwells' carefully constructed empire of lies. The long nightmare of Blackwood Creek, Sarah knew, was finally over. The true machinery of justice, long dormant, was about to begin its grinding, inexorable turn. The confession of Thomas Caldwell, raw and unsparing, sent shockwaves not just through the interrogation room, but through the very foundations of Blackwood Creek. For generations, the Caldwell name had been synonymous with power, respectability, and unassailable influence. Now, that carefully crafted facade lay shattered, revealing a core of ruthless greed and cold-blooded murder. The news spread through the small town like a brush fire, igniting a potent mix of horror, outrage, and, for many, a grim sense of validation for long-held suspicions. With Thomas Caldwell's detailed testimony and Jack Finch's damning notebook in hand, Sarah and her team moved swiftly. Elias Caldwell, despite his continued stony silence, was formally charged as an accomplice and orchestrator of the illegal mining operation and the subsequent murders. His network, once impenetrable, began to unravel under the relentless pressure of the investigation. Associates who had long benefited from the Caldwells' illicit activities, sensing the imminent collapse of their empire, suddenly found their loyalties wavering. Some, seeing no other option, began to cooperate, offering further corroboration and shedding light on the full scope of the Caldwells' criminal enterprise. The Blackwood mine, once a forgotten relic, became the epicenter of a massive, multi-agency operation. Federal agents, including specialists from the Environmental Protection Agency and the IRS, descended upon the site. The hidden adit, the secret veins, all were meticulously documented. What they found confirmed Jack Finch's detailed notes and Thomas Caldwell's confession, a sophisticated, highly profitable operation extracting rare earth minerals, all conducted off-book, without permits, without safety regulations, and with a blatant disregard for environmental impact. The scale of the illicit profits was staggering, underscoring the powerful motive behind the murders of Thomasin and Finch. The dirty gold was not just a metaphor, it was a literal description of the wealth amassed through morally bankrupt means. The discovery of a hidden vault within the Caldwell compound, accessible only by a complex system of security, revealed stacks of unmarked cash, ledgers detailing clandestine transactions, and even offshore accounts, irrefutable proof of the vast sums generated by their illegal mining. The Caldwells' financial empire, built on generations of legitimate wealth, had been quietly supplemented and significantly expanded through these illicit means, explaining their ability to maintain lavish lifestyles, even as Blackwood Creek withered around them. The impact on the town was profound. Relief mingled with a deep sense of betrayal. The families of Sheriff Thomasin and Deputy Finch, particularly the senior Finches, were finally afforded the public vindication they had so desperately craved for 13 long years. Eleanor and Arthur Finch, their faces streaked with tears, held each other tightly as the news broke. Their son's name finally cleared of the undeserved stain of complicity. The community, once quick to condemn, now rallied around them, offering condolences and support, a silent apology for their collective, unwitting judgment. The trials that followed were a media spectacle, bringing national attention to the once-forgotten town. Elias Caldwell, maintaining his unyielding facade, offered no defense, no remorse, his silence a final, defiant act of control. But Thomas Caldwell, his earlier breakdown a precursor to his complete collapse, provided damning testimony against his brother, hoping for leniency, though little was granted. The evidence, meticulously gathered by Sarah and her team, was overwhelming. Both Caldwell brothers were convicted of murder and multiple other charges related to their illegal enterprise. The fall of the Caldwell empire was complete, their name now synonymous not with wealth and power, but with ruthless criminality and unspeakable acts. For Blackwood Creek, the arrests and convictions were not just about justice, they were about cleansing, about finally ridding themselves of a festering wound that had poisoned the town's very soul for over a decade. The quiet fear that had lingered beneath the surface, the unspoken understanding that certain powers operated beyond the law, began to dissipate. The air, once heavy with unspoken secrets, felt lighter, as if a collective breath had been released. The shadow that had hung over Thomasin and Finch had lifted, replaced by the grim but ultimately liberating light of truth. The machinery of justice had moved slowly, but it had moved inexorably, grinding down the powerful and bringing forth a truth that had been buried deeper than any mine shaft. And with that truth came the arduous but hopeful process of healing for a town that had waited too long for its own redemption. The relentless heat of the Nevada desert persisted, but something in the atmosphere of Blackwood Creek had shifted. The oppressive weight of unanswered questions, of buried truths and whispered suspicions, had finally lifted. The trials and convictions of the Caldwell brothers, broadcast across national news, had ripped open old wounds, but had also initiated a long-overdue process of healing. The town, once defined by its quiet decay and hidden secrets, now found itself grappling with a raw, difficult truth, but also with a nascent sense of hope. For Detective Sarah Ward, the case was a culmination, a resolution that transcended professional achievement. Blackwood Creek had been her escape, a place she sought anonymity to outrun her own past. Yet, in unraveling the Caldwell's dark empire, she had unwittingly confronted her own demons, the quiet persistence, the meticulous detail, the unwavering pursuit of justice. These qualities, which had once felt like burdens in her previous life, had become her anchors in the churning waters of Blackwood Creek's grim history. She had found a purpose beyond merely hiding, a satisfaction in delivering justice to those long denied it. The most profound impact of the case resonated deeply within the Finch family. Eleanor and Arthur, their faces etched with the lines of years of sorrow, now held their heads higher. The community, once quick to judge, now embraced them, offering solace and quiet apologies. A small, dignified memorial service was held for Sheriff Thomasin and Deputy Jack Finch. The town, almost the entire population, gathered at the freshly erected monument outside the sheriff's office. Thomasin's name was inscribed no longer with the implicit stain of corruption, but with honor alongside Finch's. Jack Finch, the young deputy whose relentless pursuit of truth had cost him his life, was finally recognized as the courageous officer he had always been. His family, particularly his parents, stood tall, their grief still raw, but now mingled with an overwhelming sense of pride. They spoke of Jack's idealism, his unwavering dedication, and his final desperate act to ensure the truth would not remain buried. For Sarah, witnessing their quiet dignity, their hard-won peace, was a reward more meaningful than any commendation. The illegal mining operation in the Blackwood mine was permanently shut down. Federal agencies, working with state authorities, initiated extensive environmental impact assessments and reclamation efforts. The vast sums of money seized from the Caldwell's hidden accounts were earmarked for restitution and, importantly, for the revitalization of Blackwood Creek. There was talk of reinvesting in the town, of perhaps even establishing a historical mining museum to draw in tourists, acknowledging its past while charting a new future. Life in Blackwood Creek would never be the same. The Caldwell name, once synonymous with power, now invoked a shudder. The local government, under intense scrutiny, began a process of internal reform, seeking to restore trust that had been eroded by years of implicit complicity and fear. The town had been forced to look inward, to confront the uncomfortable truths that had festered beneath its quiet exterior. It was a painful, necessary reckoning. As the weeks turned into months, the constant stream of news crews dwindled, and Blackwood Creek slowly began to find its new rhythm. The initial shock gave way to a cautious optimism. Sarah, having successfully closed the most significant case of her career, was offered a prestigious transfer back to a larger city, a chance to resume the trajectory she had abandoned. But she hesitated. The quiet of Blackwood Creek, once a refuge from her past, had now become something else entirely. It was a place where she had found a profound sense of purpose, where her skills had genuinely made a difference, where she had helped to restore a broken sense of justice. One quiet evening, as the last rays of the setting sun painted the rugged mountains in hues of orange and purple, Sarah stood outside the newly cleaned-up sheriff's office. Officer Miller, who had proven his mettle throughout the grueling investigation, joined her. The air was cool now, carrying the faint, clean scent of recent rain. The ghost of the town's past still lingered, but it no longer felt oppressive. It felt like a memory, a lesson learned. Sarah looked out at the quiet, dusty streets. The town had endured, had survived, and was now, slowly but surely, beginning to heal. The truth, in the end, had found its way out, dragged from the depths of a forgotten outhouse, whispered from the pages of a dying man's notebook. It was a testament to the enduring power of right over wrong and the relentless pursuit of justice, even in the most desolate and forgotten corners of the world. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a quiet sense of belonging, a profound peace. She knew then that her journey was not yet complete. Blackwood Creek, with its scars and its newfound hope, felt like home. The new beginning was not just for the town, but for her, too.